Hello, public opinion aficionados, and welcome to Rasmussen Reports, the gold standard pollster who is not currently doing mea culpa interviews with the mainstream media. And guess who is? That would be Ann Selzer, formerly of the Des Moines Register in Iowa, who became pretty much the #1 story in polling in the 2024 cycle. And to me, that's kind of sad because I don't really think she's relevant anymore. And the big story, in my opinion, was once again, for the third cycle in a row, the entire corporate mainstream media showed that they're willing to work hand in glove with the establishment oligarchy in DC to keep the change candidate from winning. But today I woke up to 3 different text messages saying that Ann Selzer was doing an interview again, and I haven't looked at it yet. She did it apparently yesterday with PBS. And so we're going to take a look. But if you aren't schooled up on exactly what happened yet, here's a little bit of a refresher. This is the Real Clear Politics page for Iowa this cycle. And, there were not a ton of polls done. Iowa wasn't a battleground state. Everybody thought of it as basically safe Republican. And this is the poll we're talking about. 800 likely voters came out at the end of October. I think it was released on November 1st. And it has Harris +3. The same day Emerson came out with a Trump +10. Insider Advantage, who's a pretty good pollster, came out with Trump +7, but Trump won by 14 points. That's absolutely really wild. So this is a major miss, a 17-point miss. And if you look at the Iowa Trump versus Biden polling, Ann Selzer came out in June with a Trump +18, which is directionally way more correct than her October polling. Now, the reason this is such a huge story, people miss. Although I will say, I don't think Rasmussen has, like, in any of the Senate, in the state, anything anywhere close to a 17-point miss. That probably is one of the biggest misses in polling history, modern polling history. But this is this is messing up the final play in a football game like everybody was watching. Here's some context. This is MSNBC. This is Rachel Maddow.
We are still in a news environment in which there are good polls, and particularly where in some states there is a gold standard pollster.
Count how many times
who appears
she
to
says
be unaffected
standard
by larger dynamics that are making everybody whine about the polls. And the reason those individual pollsters get the gold standard designation is both because of their proven sound methodology, but also because of their track.
Here's the track record and methodology worship. Some methodologies are better than others, but if you gave me one methodology, I'm pretty sure that, using objective thinking and understanding the political context, I'd still be pretty dangerous. But yeah, this is all about reinforcing in the viewer how absolutely accurate this woman is time and time again.
Track record over time in that particular jurisdiction. And the prototypical example of a gold standard poll
That's 3 times.
is the Iowa poll done by Ann Selzer, by Ann Selzer in Iowa. The polls that she produces for the Des Moines Register in Iowa, specifically the final Iowa polls she does before each major election, her polls are known for their uncanny predictive accuracy.
It's uncanny.
This is Ann Selzer's recent track record. I mean, what you see here.
All right, stop here. So yeah, some of these are really close. Yeah, but here's the thing, no pollster is going to nail every single race exactly dead on. And what I'm seeing here is 2018 governor, she was off by 5 points, called the wrong candidate. 2020 Senate, she was off 3 points at the margin of error. 2016 president, off 2 points. So she is really accurate on the other ones. But this is in my opinion, this kind of looks like my 2024 battleground polling. I had all of them right except for one, and it was a toss-up state, Michigan. Most of them were within the margin of error. I think I was off by 1 or 2. Listen, it's impossible to get everything right as a pollster. And if somebody does, I would honestly, seriously suspect if you're seeing a real polling signal, if you're seeing something else at play. And to be honest with you, I don't even think I would want to hold myself to 100% accuracy standard. It's impossible. A lot of the states I polled this time, I was polling for the very first time. And even with them, I was kind of just about as accurate as Ann Selzer is in her own state of Iowa. But I would rather be accurate, 80% accurate 100% of the time, than 100% accurate 80% of the time. Think that over if you need a second, pause it. But yeah, let's keep going. Watch Rachel Maddow just build this woman up.
Is in each election year what her final poll said the result would be in Iowa. Next to that is what the actual result was on Election Day. And as you can see, if you look at the Senate and presidential races since 2012, her poll has accurately predicted the winner of the Senate and presidential races in Iowa within 1 or 2 points every time. There was a governor's race in 2018 where things went a little bit gang-a-glay, but in Senate and presidential races, you have seen Ann Selzer basically as a living bullseye.
A living bullseye.
And that's why lots of people had strong reactions.
Here it comes.
When the Des Moines Register Ann Selzer Iowa poll was posted last
Isn't that chuckle?
This is that poll, and it is a shock result.
Yeah, leading up an entire 2 minutes about how accurate, how untouchable, how she's the best pollster in the industry. Then that knowing chuckle, like she's delivering news that she knows her viewers are desperate for. Like, this is the news they've been waiting for. This is 3 days before the election.
It shows Kamala Harris ahead of Donald Trump by 3 points in Iowa. And the reason this is consequential to our psyche is that if this is accurate, and if anybody is accurate, it's likely to be Ann Selzer in the Iowa poll. If this is accurate, this implies that Harris might be winning Iowa. 3 points, granted, is within the margin of error here, but it's 3 points. Iowa is a state where neither campaign has spent any time or resources since the primaries.
Yeah, she's painting a picture. She's saying, well, nobody's polling Iowa. Nobody's looking at it. Everybody's focused on the battlegrounds. So this is the reason that all the pollsters are wrong, because there's a massive nationwide groundswell outside of the battlegrounds where Kamala momentum is reaching everybody, and the pollsters are just not picking it up. This is what Rachel Maddow is telling her viewers. This is probably why she's paid $25 million. What is it? A year to do one spot a week. She's really good at downloading the latest narrative into the Democrats. And the context here is that they were really desperate. They were desperate for this news. This is like the only time I can remember that a poll was the #1 trending thing on Twitter. Everybody was just liking the hell out of every mention of Ann Selzer on Twitter. It was absolutely, absolutely insane. And listen, Ann Selzer should have known the political context in which she was dropping these results and the way in which it would be received. And she should have known it just based on how many Democrat people in the media and campaigns were knocking down her door to get their hands on these results early. Yeah, here's the article talking about her time. Let's get into this. I haven't seen it yet. See what there is to see.
So, Ann, you're a self-described data girl, right? And Kay mentioned the poll that came out right before the election. I'm sure you've been crunching the numbers since. What have you learned? What went wrong?
Well, I'm not here to break any news. If you're hoping that I had landed on exactly why things went wrong, I have not.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that makes sense. If she's getting out of the business, what does it matter? But personally, I would want to know. I mean, doing this not nearly as long as her, you really get geared into, like, am I good at this? Am I doing the right things? Are my methodology, is my logic correct? How could you not want to know? And again, I don't think there's some magical reason why she got it wrong. I think there's some level of introspection that probably isn't being done, or that she's not willing to talk about on the air.
It does sort of awaken me in the middle of the night, and I think, well, maybe I should check this. This is something that would be very odd if it were to happen, but we've explored everything.
You know what? I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sleep in August when I was putting out Trump +3, Trump +2, and everybody else in the industry was putting out Harris. That's when I lost sleep. I lost sleep before the election. That's the time to question your results.
The Des Moines Register, in an unprecedented move for transparency, has put online our crosstabs, our weighting system, and my analysis, and that I've not needed.
That's nothing new. Every single poll, we put out the crosstabs, the weighting, and that's nothing. That's a nothing burger.
To update because it was pretty complete. We don't know. Do I wish I knew? Yes, I wish I knew. But
just say it. Just say you wanted Kamala Harris to win.
as I sit here today, one of the political commentators before election, but after the poll said, they've got all of these pollsters that are fidgeting with their numbers and they're adding this into their weighting structure and they're doing this with their sampling.
Yeah, the recalled vote, that's why I was right. That's why a lot of other people were not.
And Ann Selzer has never had anything to fix. Well, till now.
I got it. Tried and true. She had a methodology. She used it over and over again. She wasn't, constantly testing her assumptions. She was just, old Bessie. Old Bessie works. The problem is that I see things change. I see the online panels shift. And I say, well, is the result I see what I expected to see? And if it's not, I will adjust to it. That's the new business. It ain't what it was 30 years ago.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that, and Katerina's going to ask you a little bit more about methodology, so I won't get deep into it yet. But as Kay mentioned, you have a number of polls in the past that were remarkably accurate, and not just when everybody else was, on occasions when others were not, like that Ernst Braley poll in 2014. And maybe the answer is the same, but I'm just curious if you have any sense of why that methodology that has served you well for most of your previous careers suddenly did not in 2024.
I wish I knew the answer to that. But like I said, there wasn't anything that we saw that needed to be fixed. The reality is that more people supporting Donald Trump turned out. I'm eagerly awaiting the Secretary of State's turnout report.
Yeah, I don't know. Listen, here's the thing. There are people who went into alternative data sources, who changed their methodology, who were absolutely wrong. And here's an example of somebody who did not, who was also absolutely wrong. And ultimately, in my opinion, what it comes down to is your ability to objectively analyze your data and what it says in the larger political context. In order to do that, you have to have a pretty good ability to assess the political context. And I think what we're going to see is that she probably kind of doesn't have that, at least not anymore, because what she's talking about now is how everybody was surprised by the amount of Trump turnout. But was she not awake with all of the polling for the last 4 years? What about the issues of inflation? What about the invasion at the southern border? Could she really not see a potential groundswell for Trump support? What about all of the anecdotal evidence that everybody has about seeing stickers on the pumps or hearing FJB chanted at stadiums? Like, I guess she didn't see any of that stuff.
Reports that will happen in January to see what we can glean from that. But there wasn't an adjustment to my data when we saw that it was going to be a shocker, that I would have said, okay, let's adjust it. It's not like I know ahead of time what the right numbers are going to be in the future. So you kind of take the data designed to reveal to me our best shot at what the future is going to look like.
So, part of this is that she was handicapped by a small sample size. I don't know if that's budgetary. I think 800 is adequate for a state, but sometimes you just get a bad sample. And I publish every poll I do. And so that creates a situation where maybe I get a result and I know it's wrong and I still have to publish it. But what you can do is think about, well, is there anything within this data that shows me that there's something off? Like, for instance, are every single one of my independents completely liberal? How did they answer the issue questions? Where did I get enough young people in rural areas or vice versa? Like, a ton of questions you could ask yourself. And if you're objective, you could say, wow, man, I totally missed this subsample of the population, and go back into the field and get more data. Not fudge the numbers. If it's a bad sample, like 3 days before the election, and everybody is desperate for good news for Kamala Harris, you had to know this was going to happen.
I'm mystified about what the motivation anybody thinks I had and would act on in such a public poll. I don't understand it. And the allegations I take very seriously. They're saying that this was election interference, which is a crime. So the idea that I intentionally set up to deliver this response when I've never done that before. I've had plenty of opportunities to do it. It's not my ethic. But to suggest without a single shred of evidence that I was in cahoots with somebody, I was being paid by somebody, it's all just kind of, it's hard.
Yeah, I feel sorry for her. She's right. And I don't think for a second she took any money. I don't think she was colluding with anybody as well. Because people have accused us of colluding with the Trump campaign. Listen, I do all the numbers. I do the polls. I analyze them. I put them out. Nobody controls that except me. And yet all the time, pollsters, just another form of the media, will pass around unreleased polls, just like unreleased stories, and say to media outlets, hey, the story's coming up. Or to campaigns like, hey, here's some, like, listen, it happens all the time. We have an entire subscription service built around giving people the results of unreleased polls. So I don't think she was colluding, and I don't think she took money at all. And people who are saying she is should probably stop. I really do think it was just a polling miss. And I don't know, again, if it's personal confirmation bias or if there's something else going on. But if there was election interference, if there was, let's be clear, what I think happened is that the media pounced on this information in a way that she couldn't control to get out there and paint a false narrative that somehow Kamala Harris was winning despite all of the polls, which time and time again have overemphasized Democrat support. If there was election interference, it's probably that. It's probably the in-kind contribution that the entire media industry once again gave to Democrats. And I do think the Federal Elections Commission under Trump should investigate.
Hard to pay too much attention to it, except that they're accusing me of a crime.
Yeah, stop doing that.
So you use a certain methodology in your election polling. Can you briefly explain your method and how you screen people for your poll?
I will. And that might be a key to something that we just can't check out. So thank you for that question. What do I know about the future electorate? Nothing. What do I know about the state of Iowa? Oh, I know a lot because we have a census. So as we are interviewing people, we're going.
That's not entirely true. Now, I don't like to get into the, going overboard and predicting a future electorate. I do think it's tough to do. And this is where you go out on a limb and make a stupid call and look like a shill pollster, is by saying, well, Trump could definitely turn out all of these people. That's not what I was doing. In fact, I was changing our weights very little from the, and in fact, to be honest with you, the future electorate changed a lot in 2018. It looks like it really didn't change that much this time around. Trump changed a lot of minds. Trump got a little bit more of a turnout, but I mean, I get what she's saying. I don't think this isn't like a 17-point miss kind of point she's making.
Going to ask a question early on about how likely they are to vote. They can say definitely, probably, might or might not, probably not. So
and keep in mind, she didn't miss nationally. She missed in Iowa. Her specialty. That's what we're talking about here.
Or have you already voted? If you've already voted in our last poll, you're in. And if you say you will definitely vote, you're in. But for everybody else, we keep them on the phone to get age, sex, what county they live in. That's going to give us some geography so that we can weight all of those people. I think there were 1,100 and some in our final poll to look like the state of Iowa. Because that we...
808. She said 1,100. It's 808. She just said she screened for likely voters and hit... That's a sign. That's a big difference. That's not okay.
No. And then we extract from that those people who made our likely voter screen and interview them. Okay. So if there are proportionately more women voters who pass that screen, they're going to show up here. But they're weighted at the statewide level. It's a little geeky. But one of the things I've been thinking about is...
She's just talking about how she screens for likely voters.
With caucuses, we take you if you definitely or probably will participate. And maybe our screen was too tight. I don't know. There's no way to undo it and sort of check, well, what would the probably people have said? Because we very politely terminated the people who just said they would probably vote. But that's been our system since.
Yeah, we poll only likely voters, and maybe that's a blind spot for us. but I've been looking at how the results of all adult polls and likely voter polls differ, and it hasn't been much. Really hasn't been much. Maybe Iowa's a little bit different, but this should not explain 17 points worth of miss.
It's 2008.
So just to review, it sounds like you have likely voters and you get their age and their sex. Is there anything else, any other characteristics that you screen for?
They're county, so we can weight by congressional district if needed.
Yeah.
Our weights for this were tiny. Any pollster would look at what our weighting report said and said, that's it's not like we are
Tiny.
what we did by weighting our data, which to make it look like a cross section of all Iowa had something crazy.
I don't know what she means. I don't know what she means tiny. I would not describe weightings with that word. Maybe she means that the demographic weight set she used didn't apply much correction to some of the data points. Like you see a range in our polling of maybe, let's say, some data points getting as much as a 5x weight, some as few as a 0.2 or a 0.3x weight. Maybe what she means is, well, everybody is pretty close to 1. And I don't know, I guess if you spend a lot of time being super careful about targeting exactly the demographics, at some point, though, I wonder, I would rather just drop the ladle into the soup and pull out what I get and then weight that. Looks like she's got a different philosophy. And again, I don't know what the implications are. Like 17 points.
The weighting didn't change the horse race at all.
And some pollsters have started.
I think what she means is like, okay, well, if we weight it different, like the data is bad. We got a bad sample. I think that's what she's saying.
Looking at educational attainment of voters, because there's kind of a split between college educated and non-college educated. Why isn't that something that you used?
We did take a look at that in previous elections, and in Iowa, we found that there was some interaction, statistical term, between the variables we were using in weighting. So it didn't make things better. It made some things worse. And then once...
Yeah, there's a point of diminishing returns by adding additional weighting variables. 100% agree with her there.
This is what I call putting your dirty fingers on your data. Once you see that it threw off the proportion of people who were married or not married, then you have to worry that it's actually harming your data rather than strengthening your data.
I've heard you say in a podcast that pollsters like linear, correct?
Yeah.
So let's go back to 2020. Donald Trump easily won this.
This is really like nebulous. It's hard to convey how really simple this would be, in my opinion. And listen, I don't dig into the data as I'm weighting things. I don't really look at it as it comes across. I go through the entire process, apply the weights, load it into SPSS and see what you got for the head-to-head. And she would be like, oh, Harris +3. Wow, that's going to make news, or something is really wrong. The very next step is, well, let's look at it by men and women. Let's look at it by age. Let's look at it by party. And immediately you could see like what doesn't make sense, why it's different than what you expected. Because I can't imagine with the Trump +18 in June that she expected to see Harris +3. That's what I'm feeling from her. So what she probably saw was something like Harris winning independents by 15 points, or a massive crossover advantage for Harris instead of Trump. And that would have been something I said, well, why? Like, why are my Republicans not voting for Trump here? Why are my independents so left-leaning? Then I would see, okay, where'd they come from? What is their issue set? How do they identify their ideology? She hasn't really explicitly said that that's what went on. She said, we collected data, the weights looked okay, we didn't want to add additional weights. And the methodology discussion here wasn't like, well, how are we reaching these people? How do we know we got? I mean, it's just, I don't know.
State. And then in 2022, Iowa was among the only states that had a big so-called red wave, and Republicans seemed to be on the ascendancy. So why weren't you more surprised or said, hey, there's something weird here, when you saw what your data was telling you?
Yeah. we did say something is weird here. We just didn't see that it was something in our data that was causing it. And the context for that answer about linear was looking at where Joe Biden was.
Pretty sure I heard in a previous conversation her talk about how important abortion was as an issue to many of the people in this sample. That would be a sign, and she's not talking about it here. Something's not adding up.
In June in the Iowa poll, and where Kamala Harris was in September, and that was an uptick. I think she closed by 13 percentage points. I might not have that exactly right. But then you continue that.
Rewind that.
Was in June in the Iowa poll, and where Kamala Harris was in September, and that was an uptick. I think she closed by 13.
So she had Kamala Harris close the race 13 points from her June poll. She had Trump plus 18. Then she had this other poll that I don't know. I don't see it anywhere in Real Clear Politics, but she had some poll, 13-point movement. That's massive. Looking at all of the other national pollsters, they only showed, even the worst of them, showed a 7 or 8-point movement. So that really, I mean, there was massive news. And why didn't we hear about it? I don't understand. But to be honest with you, after that poll, this next poll showing Harris plus 3, I guess it makes sense. Well, 2 polls confirmed it. Massive movement. Kamala Harris has beaten Trump, and no other pollster shows by this much.
Percentage points. I might not have that exactly right. But then you continue that line on the same angle, and you get to where she was at plus 3. So it looked like there was a movement afoot, and that this was, she had jumped more vertically to an even bigger, that would have given us pause. But Iowa has been, has voted twice.
Yeah, I think she's starting to believe the hype about gold standard. She has a methodology. She's used it. It's been pretty accurate. It showed her one thing, and then it showed her even more of that same thing. So she said, you know what? It must be right. Here's where I will tell you the track record is important. We have a good track record. But I think volume is important as well. And Rasmussen Reports put out more polling this cycle than anybody else except Morning Consult. In fact, I'm pretty sure that I probably put out more polling this cycle than she has in the last 10 or 20 years. Now, there are people who are better than others at some states. I am going to be very careful next time I go into Texas. And I can tell you that out of all of my swing state polling, I was probably worse in Arizona. And I think Trafalgar would say they're worst in Nevada. And Atlas is definitely worse in North Carolina. It just is what it is. However, I was off by 4 points in Arizona, not 17 points. And so ultimately what it comes down to is, I think the idea of people being really acclimated to one state, they need to get out and poll more. They have to poll other states. They have to poll the nation, because they're missing all of this data that showed over the last 4 years a massive groundswell of support towards Trump. And she didn't incorporate any of that thinking into the analysis of her own polling this cycle.
Twice for Barack Obama. So it's not unreasonable to think that things might have been moving a different direction.
Was one of the flaws in this party poll
Barack Obama. So it's not bigger. There was a movement afoot, and that this was, she had jumped more vertically to an even bigger, that would have given us pause. But Iowa has been, has voted twice for Barack Obama. So it's not unreasonable to think that things might have been moving a different direction.
Confirmation bias. So she trusted her polling, and she said, you know what? The same thing is happening as in the Obama years, because Kamala Harris is the second coming of Barack Obama. That's why she missed by 17 points.
Was one of the flaws in this party, poll rather, the fact that we who cover Republican Party politics continually hear Republican politicians and officials criticize the Des Moines Register. Obviously, it's the Des Moines Register Iowa poll. And some polling nationally indicates that Republicans are less likely to answer a polling question. Is that part of
Probably.
the problem with the data?
Probably.
It could be. We do not mention the Des Moines Register's name until the very end when we're asking if they're willing to be recontacted.
Yeah, I think the issue is that people don't trust pollsters in general. Especially, she hasn't talked about if these are live operator or IVR. But we've cultivated a brand of independence, and we've been there for years. People know who Rasmussen Reports is. We do not have a problem with shy Trump supporters.
By reporters. So, hello, I'm Ann Selzer. I'm calling from the Iowa poll. And our response rates are actually better than the national average. So I think Iowans are a little more wanting to do that. But of course, that's a possibility. And of course, there's a possibility. We finished interviewing on Thursday night that things happened along the way, those final days that pushed the Republican turnout. Or
No. 60% of the country had already voted by the time her poll came out, 50 or 60%. There's no way. And I'll tell you what, she could have looked at my numbers showing that the race was locked in for like 2 or 3 months. This is bogus, and she knows it. This is no way.
Depressed the Democratic turnout. I'm eager to look at those reports.
No, if anything, your poll was used to increase the Democrat turnout.
That happened in 2004, that we showed John Kerry winning Iowa, and it was George W. Bush who ended up winning in a tight race. And former Governor Terry Branstad explained to me that over that weekend, after we were finished polling, there was this monumental effort in northwest Iowa to up the turnout among Republicans.
I don't think, listen, the level of political sophistication that I'm seeing here, you know what, I'm not a Beltway guy. I'm not the Cook Report. But to understand that nothing on earth short of an alien invasion could change the results 17 points in a weekend in modern Trump politics, there's no way.
Republicans. So things can happen. I don't know if that's what happened this time.
It's not.
At this point.
In November of this year, after the poll was released, you announced that this was the last election-related poll that you will do. Some people have doubts that you had that in the making. Now that this result has happened and it was so wildly off of the end result, is there part of you that says, I want to do another election poll?
You know, I have been working on this plan, and there are key people who know.
It's kind of addictive. She'll probably do more polling.
That this was in the works for a long time, including the Des Moines Register, who was very aware that they were going to need to find their own succession plan for the Iowa poll. So there's other people that I could point to. It looks like I got beaten and I'm out. I understand that. It's a correlation. It's not causality. Does it make me want to do one more? No.
Yeah, I believe her here. It kind of like if you know it's your last poll, literally the last poll you're putting out of your career, and maybe it's not, but it kind of, in my opinion, maybe lowers your inhibitions, makes you more susceptible to confirmation bias. Maybe she really wanted to see the first female president. That could have been what happened. I don't know.
No, I think I was committed to my plan. Would I have enjoyed being here after a spectacular win and say that I'm out? Yes, I would have preferred that, but this is the way it is, and this is my journey to sort of get through and see what it is that I want to do in the future.
The person who is the previous moderator of this program, David Yepsen, worked in concert with you at the Des Moines Register. He was their top political reporter and an opinion writer as well. I know that one of his favorite Iowa poll questions of the 1980s and 90s was,
this is brutal. Do
you believe in God? Do you have some favorite questions or favorite Iowa polls in the past that have been insightful or just something that sticks in your memory?
Well, thank you for that question. I agree with David. That was an interesting question. I don't know what the answer was right off the top, but we used to call these vegetable polls. So they're not issues so much as they are akin to an early question asked about, here are some vegetables. Is this a favorite? Is this not a favorite? Do you hate it? And what came out was lettuce was, they said the favorite vegetable, I would say the least objectionable vegetable that way. But we had a question about.
That's cute. But man, my answer is so different. My favorite poll is the one from January 2022 that basically showed that half of Biden's strongest supporters wanted to throw the unvaccinated into prison camps, fine people, imprison them for questioning the efficacy of vaccines, whatever.
About whether you eat your corn on the cob horizontally or in a vertical sort of fashion. We had a question on whether.
I'm sorry, I have to know the winner of that one. Do you remember?
Yeah, the Iowans really want to hear about.
Oh, no.
And it might have been in my file of would-be poll questions. I proposed it and didn't get it. But corn on the cob of the foods related to Iowa, number one. Then pork chop. And then third, surprise, muscatine melon. So I think of these questions as kind of revealing what I call the soft underbelly of the Iowa psyche. So we asked a question about, do you own a pair of bib overalls? You know, here's the national image of Iowa. And it was, I think, 30-some%.
That's a lot.
Do you think bald men are as attractive to men who have a full head of hair? Would you marry the same person again? How would you rate your marriage on a scale of 1 to 10? And 45% gave their marriage a perfect 10.
Yeah, you know, she probably should have put one in there about whether you support the mass deportation of illegal aliens. Okay, well, we made it through. I don't know how much of this I'm going to keep in. So there you have it. If anything, I feel really sorry for her. I think that this is basically a problem perpetrated by the mainstream media. She's been in the industry a long time. It looks like she hasn't really changed her methodology or kept up with national politics the same level as that everybody else kind of has. So she missed the absolute horrible Biden administration. I didn't hear anything talking about the main issues there at all. She talked about abortion before and how it surprised her in her polling, did not bring that up at all. And I don't really understand how she can answer for how bad she missed without really getting it to the heart of the fact that she missed what was going on with people across the country, including in Iowa. In fact, more so there than anywhere else. And so if you've built your reputation being super accurate at polling one state like Iowa, that's the one that you shouldn't miss at all, let alone have the biggest miss in modern polling history. Do I think she took money from anybody? No, not at all. But what I do think is that over time, for whatever political reasons, people built up her reputation to something that it really looks like it never should have been. A living bullseye. That's absolutely ridiculous. And Rachel Maddow is not introspectively questioning her integrity about whether she should have put so much emphasis on this poll, who, quite frankly, Rachel knew that there was absolutely no way that there was hidden Kamala Harris support. There was there was none. So ultimately, this is a story about the media and how Democrats have co-opted it. And I think a lot more of it is the bandwagon effect than most people realize. There are people riding along in the bandwagon, and they're doing it because of ideological reasons, because of maybe team identity, or maybe because of access. And then there are people running alongside the bandwagon because, you know, it gets them attention or it gets them whatever. I think that's this kind of situation. So if you're trying to find a pollster to trust their numbers, you should probably trust one that's running the other way from the bandwagon and wants nothing to do with the mainstream media. And that would be us. So if you agree, like the video and subscribe on YouTube or Rumble. Follow us on Twitter at Rasmussen_poll. Or you can go to my account, Mark_R_Mitchell, and thanks for watching.